Hi, this is a quick note to let you know that today's episode deals with tough topics, including anti-Blackness and racism at work. Please listen with care. Welcome to Beyond Equity, The Courage to Care, a podcast from ONA, the Ontario Nurses Association. This podcast is all about hearing stories from one another through a perspective of anti-racism and anti-oppression. If you think about these issues and you work in a caring profession, and especially if you're a member of ONA, this podcast is for you. Today, we're meeting Janet.
I'm Janet. I was trained in Jamaica. I came to Canada after about 6 years of practicing, post-graduating.
Once she arrived in Canada, after trying several different healthcare settings, she found her calling in a mental health hospital.
And 95% of the nurses or staff who worked in that unit were Black. So I found a sense of belonging there. There were some staff who refused to come to work to that unit because it was a Black unit. And people weren't afraid to say that. During the 90s, people were comfortable making those statements.
As you can imagine, Janet has a lot of stories from her 30-year career. We're going to start at the beginning. How did she decide on nursing as a profession?
Well, my mother would give you a very interesting spin on it. She always told me that from the moment I could talk and understand the world, I always wanted to be a nurse. She had to buy me toys that had to do with nursing, medical field all the time. I've never wanted to be anything else except a nurse. I've never worked in any other field except nursing, so I think I was a nurse from birth. I just love being able to connect with people at times in their lives when they're very vulnerable. Nursing is a helping profession, and to be able to help people and see them progress, to be back to their highest level of functioning is very rewarding. So I work in a psychiatric hospital. Mental health nursing is often seen or looked down upon by other areas in the healthcare system as if, it doesn't require nursing skills to work with individuals with mental health diagnosis. But we do utilize the full spectrum of our nursing knowledge. Because an individual has a mental health diagnosis doesn't mean that they do not require that holistic psychosocial care. They still have physical health issues. And as a nurse, you still have to be in tune to those possible needs. You have to be able to monitor the effects of their medications, which the medications that are used to treat psychiatric illness do often have medical repercussions. They often develop diabetes, hypertension, other metabolic issues. So we do use our full nursing scope of practice when we work in mental health. Even today, if I'm in a cohort of nurses and I'll ask, what's your specialty? Where do you work? And I'll hear ICU, critical care, emergency. And the minute I say mental health, you can see the affect of the person. Their response is a whole lot different than when another person will say, I work in Emerge. So it's a stigma, and I don't think we'll ever be able to change it, but it is what it is, right? I was trained in Jamaica, and the system is a little bit different. Here, it's more of a hands-on practice, but in Jamaica, the patients would invite you to sit on the side of their bed, have a conversation, you could relate, and you develop that nurse-patient relationship, which was very integral in our society. Like patients loved to make connection with their nurses. And even years after these patients were discharged from hospital, you'd be walking on the street and you'll come across someone who would say, hi, nurse. And you will never remember that person, but they always remembered you. When I came to work in Canada, I experienced a lot of racism, like in terms of co-staff. My opinion as a nurse was often discounted. Patients were often abusive. I remember before I came to work at this employer, being in an environment where there are a few patients who would not accept a Black nurse providing care for them. They would become immediately verbally abusive, using racial slurs. You're not a nurse. Get out of my room. Or questioning when you were to provide any kind of treatment, like if you're there to provide them with their medications, they'll be double checking. What is this? Are you sure this is what it is? That kind of response. So I think over a period of time, I found my voice and I felt, yes, I'm a nurse and I need to be respected as a nurse. The individuals with intellectual disability, they cannot always advocate for themselves. The behavioral changes are often indicators that there's something underlying going on with those clients. So I remember having a client, and the symptoms she was displaying at the time alerted me that there was something going amiss in terms of her diabetes. Her blood sugars would be fluctuating in the morning, and no one could figure out why. And I tried advocating and saying, maybe we should be doing random blood sugars for this client at night. And I got a bit of pushback, some negative responses. And I also had to push and advocate for this client to be referred to an endocrinology clinic, because they did, in fact, eventually listen when I took it upon myself to do a random blood sugar at night. And I did that a few times to show that there was a pattern. And finally, I was heard, and the patient benefited from me advocating for them, because after finally getting the client into a diabetes clinic, not that I wouldn't say I felt like I was right, but I felt vindicated that I was on the right track. So, being able to find my voice over a period of time, it was a gradual process. I didn't always feel that confident. So I think it was maybe early 2000. I had a student from one of the local universities doing her consolidation. And I'd expected it to be a very pleasant, rewarding, fulfilling experience, because learning goes both ways. So I was open to this young lady, and I noticed that she was a bit withdrawn, and we were walking down through the parking lot, and she did ask me where I was from. And I told her I was from Jamaica, and she made a comment, "Oh, so you're not a pure Canadian. You're not a pure Canadian like me." I was a bit taken aback, and I was immediately triggered. But I had some self-control where I didn't react. I was cognizant of the fact that I was in a teaching role, a leadership role, and I needed to not let my emotions impact on that preceptor-student relationship. But at some point later on, before the semester ended, I did, let her know that she had made a comment that could have been seen as being racist. And despite the fact that she made that comment, I wouldn't allow it to impact on my evaluation of her grade. But I did let her know that going forward in her nursing profession, she should be a little bit more self-aware and be aware of her biases, and not let that impact on her relationship with other nurses, as well as her ability to provide patient care. So that was how I handled it. But I'll never forget that, being told that I'm not a pure Canadian. It is easy for patients to identify that I'm Black, right? I find that Black patients, their countenance changes when you enter their environment as a Black individual. They will often gravitate towards you. They'll often try to engage with you. And of course, that depends on their mental status, how ill they are. I worked in an area where we provided therapeutic programming for clients. And most of the clients that would attend those programs were from the forensic system. They entered treatment through the court system. So whatever issues they had in the community, they come in for treatment under the court system. They identified with me because I looked like them. And a majority of these individuals were from Jamaican background. So it gave them a lot of pleasure to be able to talk about their cultural experiences. I could relate to them from a cultural perspective. We could talk about things from Jamaica. I could speak in our dialect, and it would make the conversation so light. There would be lots of laughter. I found that I could use that cultural aspect of my life to switch the perspective for that individual. If an individual was having a bad day, whether they were responding to psychosis that they were experiencing, I would launch in my Jamaican dialect and bring a smile to that person's face so I could change that experience in the moment for them. That was really fulfilling. I can also remember one individual client I had on an inpatient unit who, for the life of me, would not take medications. And it was not surprising for me. A lot of men from Jamaica, they think that taking manufactured medication was a no-no. So this individual refused to take medications. And it was always a challenge. And that would lead to an escalation because we were forcing this individual to take what he didn't want, right? But it wasn't forced. It was deemed to be necessary. And when myself and as well as a few other Jamaican nurses that I worked with were on shift, we would try to engage this individual, making that cultural connection. And this individual responded to us because he identified with us. He felt like we were approaching from a level of understanding. He felt a sense of belonging with us, and being able to use that connection to sit down and engage with this individual to de-escalate, the situation. Walking along the hallway and seeing this individual and just talking to him, saying hi to him or start a conversation in using my Jamaican dialect. If he wasn't responding, just to say something related to something he identified with from a Jamaican perspective. A Jamaican speaking to another Jamaican was also often very effective in switching his thought process in any given moment. So that felt quite rewarding, and I had that experience throughout my practice, predominantly where I am right now, because there's a large percentage of Blacks in our service. Last week, I was walking, just caught up in my own thought process, and I was walking past an individual and I heard, "Hi, Janet." And I stopped and looked back. I didn't recognize the person, but that person recognized me, and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And the individual said, "Do you remember I used to come to groups with you?" And just that individual making that connection and recognizing that I did have some kind of impact, that it's been quite a few years since I did that kind of work that individual was involved in. But he remembered me. And just me walking by, he remembered my name. He spoke to me using the Jamaican dialect. So that relationship is still there. He remembered that I'm Jamaican and was able to relate to me after all this time. It changed my afternoon after having had that encounter, right? So those experiences, it validated my role as a nurse in that nurse-patient relationship, but it also validated that being able to make that cultural connection with clients, and it's not only from a Black on Black experience. Canada is a multicultural environment. We have people from different cultures, and nurses reflect that variation in cultures. And for each individual nurse to be able to connect with their patients from a cultural perspective is very important. We understand our cultures. We understand how people from our culture relate to the healthcare system, how they will understand treatment approaches, and being able to use that in our relationship to help that individual along their health journey is so important. And I hope that all nurses do recognize that and use that tool. It's a very strong tool that we have. One of the things that impacted me from the early days of practicing nursing in Canada, I remember starting out in mental health in this environment. I was drawn to a particular unit, and 95% of the nurses or staff who worked on that unit were Black. And all those Black nurses were from a Jamaican background. So I found a sense of belonging there. And over a period of time, I became more comfortable in a work environment as a Black nurse because I felt supported. There was a community around me, and we all had shared experiences. So I was able to block all the noises from outside that, oh, I don't want to work on that unit. It's a Black unit. There was that stigma. A lot of nurses would not come to that unit, but the temporary staff who had to be assigned there because we needed additional staff. There were some staff who would refuse to come to work to that unit because it was a Black unit. We had a few non-Black staff who took positions there and they didn't stay for very long. It was a Black unit. And people weren't afraid to say that. During the 90s, people were comfortable making those statements because it was not frowned upon. It was acceptable to label people as being Black and being able to say that out without any fear of people speaking out or repercussions. But I think in my experience, nurses, we formed a community around each other. The support was there. And feeling that support, I didn't let all the noise from outside impact me. You know, this was where I wanted to be. I belonged there. I had a right to be there. And gradually that community, the numbers dwindled. People retired. People went elsewhere. They were older than I am. They were older nurses. And after a while, I was the only one left behind.
Over the years, staff came and went. Janet began to have negative interactions with her manager, and this set her on a new path with her union.
The union is a very supportive environment. A lot of individuals out there aren't using their union the way they should. But speaking to my bargaining unit president at the time and letting her know of the experiences I was having was a support for me. At one point, she marched me over to the Human Resources Department and spoke to our HR rep and said, this has got to stop. She's been targeted and this has got to stop. So, you know, that experience sort of bolstered me a little bit. I said, this is where I belong. I can make my voice stronger. I can advocate for individuals. So I became an activist in the union. And over the years, that activism has led me to serve on various committees. And I'm able to be the voice for individuals who feel a bit intimidated by the system and to use that voice to advocate for change, which change has started in my organization. It is a lot better than it was when I started. There's still some things that need to change, but there has been some improvement, which I'm happy for. Patients have become more accepting. I'm not experiencing as much verbal outbursts that have that racist tint to it. I mean, other staff are still experiencing, but I haven't. We're still getting a lot of reports of individuals being targeted because of their race, their skin color. Staff are still feeling discriminated against. They're experiencing racial bias. They're still reporting feeling harassed and bullied. And being able to support them to verbalize these experiences, to have them investigated, and for it to be addressed is a very important role as an advocate and as a union rep. Individuals, they need that support. There are way more Black leaders in my organization than when I started. People are speaking out more. They're not afraid to speak up. and the fact that we have processes in place for these concerns to be heard and addressed. We didn't have that when I started. So that's where I see a lot of change happening. Our union is changing in terms of being cognizant of having that anti-racism lens in the work they do. So things have changed over the years, for sure. I'm not looking forward to retiring, but I will at some point because I need to be able to have time for all my hobbies. I always joke that if there was a road to Jamaica, I'd be driving on it back and forth. So I love driving and exploring. I love camping. I love tinkering around, learning how to do things. I'm hoping to stick around for as long as I can. I love my work as a union rep. I think finding my place in the union has sort of bolstered me and kept me going. Because I tell some of my colleagues, if I wasn't an activist in ONA, I probably would have gone on to something else at some point. But I love what I do. I love my patient care, but I love being an ONA rep. Being able to use my voice to advocate for others who may feel the same way I felt when I just started nursing in Canada. I felt like I didn't have a voice. I had to just go into work, suck it up, survive the shift and go home. There are a lot of nurses out there that do feel that way. They feel that, in order to survive, they have to just remain quiet, get through the shift and get home safely. So being able to use that voice has been a real buffer for me, and I want to keep going as long as I can. It is important for me to be able to speak up and to advocate for my patients, not only from a cultural perspective, but for all patients. But I feel that need to advocate for patients who look like me, who speak like me, who have backgrounds similar to mine, because they're often misunderstood. And I hope going forward that recognition is carried forward into how patients are approached, how they're treated, how they're advocated for, so that they're successful in their health journey, whether it's in an acute care medical setting or in a mental health setting.
Thank you, Janet, for telling your story and for the work you do advocating for your colleagues and the patients in your care. Your community is lucky to have you. Now, here are 2 takeaways from today's conversation with Janet. Number 1, bringing your culture into the workplace can be a way to connect with patients and clients and to help them heal. Number 2, getting involved with your union can be a way to create the change you want to see. Now, we're going to end with one of the 10 tips from ONA's Anti-Racism and Anti-Oppression Toolkit, and you might want to write a list, so get a piece of paper or make a note on your phone. Here's the tip. Write a list identifying your professional and social spheres of influence, power, privilege, and marginality in your work, bargaining units, locals, the union, and in your social and cultural environments. The takeaways and tips from today's episode are directly linked to ONA's strategic plan and the ONA Anti-Racism Anti-Oppression Action Plan. You can read more about them at ona.org. If you want to talk about your own mental health, check to see if you can access an employee assistance program through work or find help through beyondsilence.ca, a mental health support tool developed by and for healthcare workers. For more information, visit ona.org/ARAO. This podcast is produced by Hannah Sung and Meg Shannon for ONA, the Ontario Nurses Association. Post-production is by Reza Daya. Original theme music is composed by James Hill for Project Whatever. Thank you to Kieran Maxwell, Patrick Mazambi, Lauren Snowball, to students James K. and Maya Aris, and to ONA leadership, including Provincial President Aaron Aris, CEO Andrea Kay, Vice President and Human Rights and Equity Portfolio Holder Karen Mackay-Eden, and Vice President Rachel Muir. If you like this episode, especially if you work in healthcare, share this with your people. And thank you for listening.